The dress fit like a second skin, sleek navy silk, with a neckline that whispered elegance without trying too hard. Fallon stood in front of the boutique mirror, her reflection sharp under the flattering lights, but her thoughts a storm beneath the surface. She should have been glowing. She should have been imagining walking down the aisle to Drew, the man she had spent 4 years building a life with. Instead, she was replaying his recent texts, distant flat full of excuses. Busy with work. Sorry. We'll call later. Except he never did. And Fallon, ever the peacekeeper, never pushed. That morning, she had invited her sister Ivy to join her at the fitting, hoping for sisterly support. Ivy arrived 30 minutes late, designer sunglasses perched on her head, like a crown dropping her bag on a velvet chair without apology. It's a little safe, don't you think? She said, circling Fallon slowly. Drew is the kind of guy who needs to be wowed. Fallon blinked, startled. What do you mean? Ivy only shrugged and picked at a rack of veils. Nothing. Just men get bored. The comment sank into Fallon's chest like a stone. By the end of the appointment, her head throbbed and her heart felt splintered. She decided to go home early to talk to Drew to clear the fog growing between them. As she reached the apartment door, she heard laughter. Drew's deep voice. Ivy's unmistakable giggle. Fallon froze, heart-dropping, before she even turned the handle. Inside, they sat close at the kitchen island wine glasses, in hand smiling over honeymoon brochures. Ivy spotted her first and smiled with practiced calm. Sarah, you're home early. Drew stood up slowly, guilt flickering behind his eyes. We need to talk. Fallon looked at them, both realizing with bone-deep clarity this was not new. She set down her purse carefully and spoke without a tremble. No. You need to finish whatever this is. She turned around, walked out, and didn't look back. Not yet. Not until she had something to return with. Something better than revenge. Herself. Fallon did not cry. Not when Ivy smirked. Not when Drew avoided eye contact. And not even when her parents, seated across from her at the oak dining table, she once helped them refinish, delivered their final betrayal with tea and gentle voices. Fallon, her mother said, placing a hand over hers, sometimes people grow apart. And maybe Drew was never truly yours to begin with. Her father added, your sister has always been spirited. Maybe they're better matched. The words fell like slow slicing rain. Ivy, always the golden girl. Fallon, the quiet storm. She looked from one face to the next and realized they were never going to defend her. They never had. They saw her composure as weakness, her silence as consent. Her mother said they hoped she would still come to the wedding to show you're the bigger person. Fallon stood, smoothed her coat, and simply said, No, I'm done playing small. That night, she drained the shared account. Every cent she had contributed, she reclaimed. She left the engagement ring on the nightstand, its cold glint catching the last of the lamplight. Then she booked a one-way ticket to Newfoundland. The flight was in 6 hours. She packed only essentials, her sketchbooks, her grandfather's carving tools, and one framed photo of herself, age 11, arms caked in clay eyes, fierce with possibility. Before boarding, she sent one group message. You'll never hear from me again. You chose your side. Live with it. When the plane lifted, so did something else, a weight, a name, maybe even a version of herself. Fallon Walker ceased to exist. In her place was a woman without history, a storm without warning. Have you ever been betrayed by the people closest to you? Comment yes below if you've ever been told to shrink, to stay silent, to accept less. And subscribe because Fallon's just getting started. The town she arrived in smelled like salt and solitude. She found work at a seaside cafe, brewing coffee for fishermen and painters. No one asked who she used to be. They only cared who she was becoming. At night, in a rented shack, she picked up the welding torch for the first time in years. The sparks lit her fingers, and with them, her fire returned. Fallon did not vanish. She was rebuilding, one piece of steel at a time. Fallon found her new name long before she found peace. The locals in the small harbor town had taken to calling her Red, after the copper streak she dyed through her dark curls and the flame-welded sculptures she left on the edge of the cliffs facing the sea. No one pressed her for details. No past, no heartbreak, no scandal. Just Red, the girl who fixed the cafe's broken espresso machine without a manual and carved twisted iron roses in her free time. It suited her. Fallon had learned not to trust those who claimed to know her, only those who accepted the mystery. Each morning she hiked the foggy trail behind her rented cottage, her hands wrapped in leather gloves, and her soul stitched back together by the cold salt air. Welding goggles on, she bent steel to her will. What once bound her was now the very thing she shaped with fire. She created pieces that didn't whisper, they roared, birds with wings of chains, hearts encased in thorned wire, a woman's silhouette standing tall against iron storms. Each sculpture was a wound transformed, a betrayal melted into beauty. One afternoon, while sketching on a driftwood bench near the docks, she met him, Cole. Tall, calm eyes the color of smoked glass, and a voice like quiet thunder. He didn't ask about her past. He only asked what she was building next. She told him something impossible. Cole returned a week later with a box of salvaged ship metal and no explanation. He worked quietly beside her, never overstepping, never guessing. His presence was an anchor, but never a chain. Word spread of her work. A small gallery invited her to exhibit. Then a collector called. Then a museum. Fallon now, Red watched her anonymity begin to unravel, this time on her terms. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was emerging forged in flame. And when the wedding invitation arrived, gold-trimmed and smug, with her name misspelled, and her silence assumed, she didn't react with fury. She booked a flight. This time, not to run, but to return. Not for revenge. For closure. Fallon was no longer the girl left behind. She was the woman they'd regret crossing. And the storm was just beginning. Fallon arrived at the wedding dressed in a tailored black jumpsuit that whispered elegance and authority in equal measure. No one recognized her at first. She had traded soft curls for a sharp bob, muted tones for unapologetic boldness. The security guard at the front scanned the guest list. Her name wasn't on it. "Try Kennedy Red," she said smoothly. Her alias now, more than a cover, it was her armor. He let her through with a nod. Inside, the celebration was in full swing, all white roses, champagne towers, and curated perfection. Fallon moved like a ghost in velvet, unnoticed until she chose to be. It happened at the toast. Ivy clinked her glass, glowing in ivory silk, her voice syrupy sweet. To second chances, she set her gaze sweeping the room until it landed on Fallon. The microphone slipped. Murmurs rippled. Drew choked on his drink. Fallon walked forward slowly, each step deliberate. She took the mic with a smile that never reached her eyes. "To lies," she said. "To betrayal disguised as love. And to the moment a woman decides she's done playing nice." Gasps echoed through the hall. Ivy paled. Fallon reached into her clutch and pulled out a small black envelope. "A wedding gift," she said, handing it to Drew. "Inside is a copy of the lease termination for the downtown loft, the one you're now locked out of. Also included your final severance package from the art studio you helped me manage. Turns out the board no longer believes in nepotism." She turned to Ivy. "As for you, I hope you enjoy your honeymoon in Santorini. The villa reservation is under my name. But don't worry, I canceled it." Fallon didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply turned away and walked out of the ballroom, heels clicking like punctuation marks on polished marble. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin. She inhaled deeply. This wasn't vengeance. This was clarity. For years, she had let them define her story. Not anymore. She stepped into the waiting car, where Cole sat quietly, engine running. He didn't ask what happened inside. He didn't need to. Fallon looked ahead, eyes steady. The chapter was closing, but the book wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Fallon watched the wedding unravel like a ribbon pulled too tight. After her speech, the guests didn't know whether to applaud or disappear into the shadows. Ivy stood frozen, glassy-eyed, clutching the bouquet like a lifeline. Drew had the decency to look embarrassed, though not enough to apologize. Fallon didn't wait for either of them to speak. The truth had been served, and the silence afterward was a feast in itself. But the fallout traveled faster than the toasts. By the next morning, Ivy's fiancé had vanished from their honeymoon suite. A few whispers later, it surfaced that he was seen boarding a flight alone. He had overheard enough to know Ivy's Golden Girl image had a crack, and maybe he was not signing up for forever with someone so easily cruel. As for Drew, the loft key no longer worked. Fallon had changed the locks and transferred ownership of the studio to her new foundation, one that supported women rebuilding their lives after betrayal. His emails bounced. His access vanished. The art studio flourished under new leadership. The family, however, turned desperate. Fallon's mother called tears threaded into her voice, insisting that everything had just gotten out of hand. Her father left a voicemail apologizing, but only after Mr. Fairchild, the gallery investor, pulled out of a joint venture citing ethical concerns. Fallon didn't return the calls. She didn't need to. Her success now spoke louder than their regrets. Her sister's law firm, ironically, they had just lost their lease. Fallon had purchased the building months ago under a subsidiary. She had never planned to evict them, but now she considered it poetic justice. Fallon returned to her coastal town, not triumphant, but anchored. The cafe welcomed her with warm smiles. Her workshop smelled of metal fire and freedom. Cole handed her a new box of salvaged iron and kissed her forehead. She smiled quietly and returned to the forge. The world had finally seen what she was made of, not porcelain or silence, but steel and fire. And she was not done yet. The next sculpture she welded was called Resurgence. It rose 12 feet tall and carried the inscription, "She who was underestimated now stands unshaken." Because Fallon had burned the past, not in revenge, but to light her way forward. The gallery opening was held in a converted lighthouse overlooking the ocean, where wind met stone and history whispered through salt-stung air. Fallon stood at the center of it, all surrounded by her sculptures, each one a fragment of the journey she had forged through betrayal, humiliation, and rebirth. Her name, once scorned in private conversations, now shimmered in silver on the event banners, Fallon Myron Artist in flame. The once forgotten girl was now the force setting rooms on fire without ever raising her voice. Critics mingled with collectors. Ivy's name was barely a memory, now reduced to a side glance between guests who had once praised her charm, but now avoided the topic altogether. Drew had faded into obscurity, his reputation quietly diminished after his role in Fallon's downfall became part of a cautionary tale whispered across art circles and legal boards. Her sister relocated demoted and seemingly swallowed by the very world she once lorded over. But Fallon didn't revel in their ruin, she moved beyond it. She had learned the power of stillness, of building rather than breaking. Cole, standing in the back with arms crossed and pride in his eyes, had never needed to understand every detail. He simply believed in her, and that was enough. As the event unfolded, a journalist approached her with a simple question. "If you could say one thing to those who doubted you, what would it be?" Fallon didn't hesitate. "Thank you," she said calmly. "They gave me the fire. I just chose to forge something with it." The applause that followed wasn't just for the art. It was for the woman who had been called fragile, naive, replaceable, and who now stood taller than any sculpture in the room. Her next installation would be international. A city museum had commissioned her to create a centerpiece titled Inheritance, a work meant to explore how legacy is reshaped by those bold enough to claim it. Fallon had reclaimed hers, but she knew this was not an ending. Some stories are meant to echo, and this time she would write every chapter in iron and light etched into the world by her own hands. If you believe in rising from the ashes, stronger than before, type yes in the comments and subscribe to follow Fallon's journey. Because the reckoning may be over, but the legacy is just beginning. ChatGPT Jean Noy. The following morning, Fallon stood barefoot on the terrace of her coastal studio, watching the tide roll in as dawn spilled gold across the sky. The wind tugged at her linen robe, soft and unassuming, like the woman she used to be. Inside, her latest commission, Inheritance, waited to be shipped to a museum in Vienna. But for now, she breathed in the silence the peace that came not from triumph over others, but from finally choosing herself. Her father had called again the night before. This time, no excuses. Just silence, followed by a choked, "You were right." Fallon had listened without interrupting. She did not need his apology to validate what she had built, but she recognized the weight of those words. He had finally seen her, not through the lens of pride or disappointment, but through the truth of her resilience. Her past no longer haunted her. Ivy's betrayals, Drew's condescension, the years of being dismissed and belittled, none of it had the power to shrink her anymore. They were merely echoes in the gallery of her growth. Fallon had learned the rarest kind of strength, quiet, deliberate, unstoppable. The kind that does not scream, but simply endures, until the world has no choice but to notice. Later that day, she would board a plane for Paris to meet with the curators of a private collection. She would wear a simple black suit, arrive without an entourage, and let her work speak for itself. Just as she always had. This was never about revenge. It was about return. To self. To purpose. To fire. If you have ever been underestimated, dismissed, or silenced, this story is yours too. Fallon is not just a character, she is a mirror. Follow her journey. The final chapter has yet to be written. Subscribe now and comment rise if you're ready for what comes next.